So I am really honored to be here today. I basically will go anywhere Rebecca tells me to go. I think what she has created here is just absolutely remarkable. And the conversation about how art and food blend and can talk and inspire us is just brilliant. And it, to me, brings art back to its place in the world, which is dealing with very practical things. I studied art history in college in Italy for a few months, and I was struck by one of the schools in Venice that produced a gorgeous portrait of a woman breastfeeding. And this was actually one of the very first public health images. They wanted to encourage women to breastfeed their own babies because women who were leaving babies to be breastfed by nursemaids might have, babies might have been more inclined to get the plague. And so art actually served as public health information to encourage this beautiful act of breastfeeding. And I just think what you're doing here with this exhibit is just totally inspiring, and I'm hopeful that the seed that is planted in this year, that this exhibit is up and in this conference with these brilliant people who are gathered here today, is going to continue the conversation about this very important subject of food. It's essential to us, and I think it's important that we're here. So thank you for bringing us together. I was asked to speak about the history of food as medicine, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can take Hippocrates' word for it. Food is medicine. Hippocrates said, "Let food be thy medicine shall be thy food." And I think it doesn't really get any more clear than that. So I can be done with my presentation. But let's just talk a little bit about how he got there and why this became part of the vernacular. So Hippocrates developed a system of medicine that was based on observation of nature. And we've talked a lot about observation of nature and living closer to the natural environment. You've all heard the term, I'm sure, as above, so below. And it turns out that our bodies are really fractals of what's happening in the broader context of nature. And so these observations allowed the foundation for modern medicine to be born. Hippocrates used his insights to develop this system of medicine that was based on 4 seasons, 4 elements: air, water, earth, and fire. 4 attributes: hot, moist, cold, and dry, and all of these are demonstrated on this example here. So each of our bodies actually also contains these 4 attributes. The state of health is viewed as a balance of these various attributes. And in letting thy food be thy medicine, we are essentially enabling ourselves to balance these tempers or these humors inside of our bodies. The term vis medicatrix naturae is the healing power of nature, and that stems from the teachings of the Hippocratic corpus. So this actually goes back to the origins of Western medicine, and maybe we just need to remember, because it really wasn't that long ago that we lost this information, we just need to remember that this is part of the core of our medicine. So in the Hippocratic tradition, there were 4 temperaments, and these are best explained by Winnie the Pooh characters. So you know Bouncy Tigger is the sanguine character. He's very balanced and jovial and equanimous, patient and thoughtful. He could be able to judge people in situations well and also shift his mood easily from one situation to the next. Fastidious Rabbit is very able to make decisions. He's quick to act and prefers action over contemplation. So this is the leader who has a direction that we want to go. Withdrawn Eeyore is melancholic, and a healthy dose of melancholy was actually thought to be an asset because it helped us to keep our feet on the ground, temper some of our enthusiasms. We could empathize with the distress of others, appreciate art. This was more of an introspective phase. And Pooh is phlegmatic, and Pooh is calm and stable and serene. He has a capacity for prolonged concentration and appropriate judgments and appraisals of situations. He's the wise one of the bunch. So again, each of us has these 4 temperaments. One may be stronger, but we go through these temperaments throughout the day. Morning, we might feel more sanguine, more up and ready to go. By afternoon, we might be making decisions. By evening, we want to rest. And by nighttime, we're ready for bed. We want to just go to sleep and take care of ourselves that way. We might experience these temperaments throughout the seasons. So spring is a very sanguine, juicy time of the year. Summer is hot and choleric and full of action. Autumn is a little bit more withdrawn. The energy moves downward. And winter is more phlegmatic. So over the course of our lives, we might even experience this. So these are things that we experience all the time. In our childhood, we are sanguine. In our youth, we are choleric, and we want to change the world. By the time we reach maturity, we're a little more introspective. We've learned a few lessons. Maybe we're reevaluating where we want to go from here. And in old age, we finally get the benefit of being wise and grounded in measured in where we go. So we're going to talk now about what happens when some of these temperaments can get a little bit out of balance. Sometimes our springs are a little bit colder or hotter than usual. And so when hot, moist Tigger is in excess, he could demonstrate a general insensitivity to others and an indifference to the fate of others. And so we would want to bring some balance in by cooling and toning that sense. And we can do that with food. Foods that are sour and bitter have astringent qualities. These things might be prescribed in order to bring balance into them. So think about broccoli, spinach, citrus fruits, vinegar, sauerkraut. We would want Tigger to avoid excess sweets and stimulants. I know you can imagine Tigger on coffee, and so this is something we would want to maybe potentially avoid if that is in fact in balance. Rabbit, the choleric, could become angry and negative. This sort of person could could easily be prone to anger and have episodes of uncontrolled or potentially dangerous rage. This is where Rabbit moves into Yosemite Sam. And so we would want to maybe bring some balance to that character by cooling and moistening. These foods such as figs, blueberries, blackberries, walnuts, we would want that choleric person to avoid fat and spice and salt and stimulants. Interestingly, choleric imbalance is something that we see very prevalent in our society. These are people who maybe need to take a vacation. Also interestingly, they might be really drawn to these same things that they are supposed to avoid in order to bring their temperament back into balance. So you see choleric people maybe eating a lot of spices, heating up their system even more, drying them out even more, and maybe exacerbating their imbalance. Melancholics might have had episodes of mild melancholy, but they could be prone to depression in an imbalanced situation. And so we would want foods that would warm them up and build them up. Avocados, nuts and seeds, shellfish, any kind of salty food could bring moisture to a dry system. We would want the melancholic to avoid sedatives that could exacerbate their depression. And finally, an imbalanced phlegmatic looks a lot like a couch potato. They maybe are going to be slow and sleepy and really lack drive of any sort. And so again, we want to bring some drying and as well as warming herbs to that situation, especially in their digestive system. So gentle spices, warming aromatics, ginger, fennel, sage, those kinds of things. We would want the phlegmatic to avoid dairy and raw foods because those bring additional moisture and they also cool the system down. So these are the ways that physicians might have thought about prescribing food in ancient medicine. We would also maybe want to propose exercise because all temperaments can benefit from exercise. We would maybe want the sanguine and the choleric to participate in team sports so that they don't get their ego too out of balance. And certainly exercise is going to help the melancholic and the phlegmatic warm up their system and generate some of their own heat. So we can take all of this to mean that in order for us to keep our balance, we have to consume a variety of foods with a variety of tastes, because remember, we are constantly experiencing these cycles throughout our lives. So understanding why we crave certain things or desire or prefer certain tastes helps us to understand more of the foundation of modern medicine. Our tastes actually emerged with our dietary choices. And Hippocrates was in fact building on millions of years of human history. You know, we talk about recent food things going on. In the last 40 years, we've had some pretty dramatic changes in our food supply. We have 2 or 3 or 4 million years of history that we are relying on with food that we need to really think a little bit more about. Early humans would have sought nutritional choices in a closed tropical forest. We were probably eating mostly fruit and leaves. And when we left that environment and moved into the savannah, it greatly expanded our repertoire. And so, oh, sorry, I need to talk about this guy. I apologize. Thanks for letting me know. So observations of the diets of other animals might have informed how we chose our own dietary things. For example, if I'm in the jungle and I'm looking at this orangutan and I don't know what he's eating, I'm thinking, I'm going to see what happens to that guy. I might follow him and see if he collapses because he's eating something poisonous. Or if he doesn't collapse and he just runs away, maybe I'll try to eat that too. So a lot of experimentation and observation over time. We also probably observed plants themselves in their own habitat, how they grew, whether the soil was acrid or moist. We would look at their color, the odor, the taste, to be able to determine what the nutritional value of those substances actually were. In order to look at the history of plants becoming medicines, we have to look at what many tribes have told us, which is that they've communicated directly with the plants themselves. People in conversation directly with plants. I actually wrote my master's thesis about that, but that's a whole different conversation that we're not going to talk about today. We're going to focus more on how our tastes continue to evolve. So the sense of taste, again, allowed us to identify nutritious foods that were high in nutritious content. And it also helped us to avoid foods that were low in nutritious content so that we wouldn't waste our energy or have any metabolic harm from the choices we were making. And also to help us to prevent and for ourselves from taking in potentially lethal toxins. Our sense of sweetness and the capacity for eating sweetness really does stem from this jungle experience where sweet was prevalent in the fruits we were eating. Sweet is easy and nourishing. It's very much, has a lot of available calories. It also is much more easily tolerated in the body. And it even, when you swallow sweetness, it moves across the mouth more rhythmically. It's just everything is good about the sweetness. Bitter, on the other hand, can be toxic. And so bitters move across the tongue with gapes and shudders, and they can even involve serious head shaking and arm flailing. So you kind of have to be careful with bitters because that intense reaction is generally protective. For example, women in their first trimester of pregnancy experience nausea from eating foods that even have potentially very low and innocuous levels of toxins that would otherwise be tolerated. This is because when the babies are first being formed in the mom's belly, their very sensitive organs are starting to develop, and this is a critical time where even exposure to low levels of toxins can damage those sensitive organs. So the pregnant woman's brain conditions itself to become more sensitive to toxic exposure, and because of that, they have nausea. So where's Abby? Abby, Abby probably experienced that, and I want to thank you, and your baby thanks you for your period of morning sickness. So toxins are really beneficial. And they also have some of these qualities that maybe are a little bit more challenging for our bodies to take on. So I thought, I'm going to be able to do this, no problem. It's okay. So anyway. Medicinal qualities in foods often come up as bitter tastes too. So it's important that we actually have some bitterness in our diet, and I will talk a little bit more about that later. The development of sour taste receptors is also thought to be a result of the need for vitamin C in our diet, which is absolutely essential to sustaining life. Savory, this craving for hamburgers, actually comes from aged or fermented foods, which our bodies recognize as being really available macro and micronutrients, as well as probiotic bacteria. Salt helps to balance the osmotic pressure in our bodies, and when we lose salt through sweating, we need salt in our diets to be able to preserve that balance, which is critical to the cellular life. So depending upon whether we have sweet, salty, bitter, sour, or savory foods, these foods generate different responses in our bodies. So they also might also be described as moist, hot, dry, and cold in the Hippocratic model. I hope that looks a little familiar. So this is what our modern foraging tends to look like, and others this morning or today have talked a little bit about the advent of grocery stores. And for those of us, because of our proclivity towards sweet and this recognition of high nutrient foods, this ability to actually identify those nutrients in foods is essential for people living in low food security. There's about 1 billion people on the planet that have low food security, and the ability to recognize nutrient-rich foods is very important. But for those of us who are living in a society where we have ready access to energy-dense foods, our preference for these sugary, salty, and fatty foods have helped to cause overnutrition-related diseases such as obesity and diabetes. These diseases are absolutely modern problems and did not exist prior to the modern food challenges. And what's more important is that we've created foods that are hyper appealing in this sense. In fact, overly salty, overly sugary, overly full of fats and other things that kind of pique our nutritious interest. And so we have a situation where people are eating a lot of calories that put a significant drain on their pancreas because of the insulin need, but they're missing a lot of the micronutrients that make our physiology actually function appropriately. And those micronutrients often come from plants, and especially plants that are grown in really high quality soil. So food is something that actually creates the basic ingredients that we need for our biochemistry, our muscular and skeletal systems, and so we really need to make sure we're having a diverse diet. One example of this is pH. So we can see from this slide that a pH of 7 is about neutral. And that's kind of where we want to maintain. But there's foods on the end of acidic, back in the red category, and also on the higher alkaline, that can move us in different directions. And our body's inclination will be to stay at that neutral pH of 7. And so we will make adjustments based on our diet in order to help to maintain that neutral pH. So when we're eating a high acidic diet, the body is going to want to compensate for that by alkalizing. And what's interesting about this to me is that some of those foods on the high acidic end might be categorized as hot and dry in the Hippocratic model. Those in the yellows may be hot and moist. On the other end, in the blues, we have cold and moist and cold and dry at the very edge of the alkaline scale. So this even plays out that sense that the Hippocratic model really more or less understood what they were talking about, and this is modern science and a pH concept that really kind of informs that. So I think that's kind of fun. Another really cool modern example of how taste has been borne out in modern science. We're beginning to understand the prevalence of taste receptors not only in our mouths but throughout our body. It turns out there are bitter taste receptors in our sinuses that help us to actually launch an immune defense even before microbes come into our systems. And this is because the microbes themselves, those invasive species that want to attack us and give us a cold, those microbes use a bitter kind of a sense in order to communicate with each other. The receptors in our sinuses actually pick up that communication attempt, and we can upregulate an immune cycle without even having any contact with microbes before they enter our bodies. It's totally fascinating. The other thing that has been borne out recently is there are taste receptors on the heart, and these bitter taste receptors actually help to regulate the strength of the contraction of the heart. There are as many bitter taste receptors on the heart as there are receptors for hormones that control blood pressure. And it turns out that eating bitter foods has as much of an effect on controlling blood pressure as these other hormones do. So really it's important to have that diverse diet and to take in as many of those tastes as you can over time. It has an absolute effect on our body's function. And one final example related to the ancestral diet, we have just started to learn the importance of bacteria in our guts in the role of immune function, neurological function, cardiovascular function, and many, many, many more. For millions of years, we have co-evolved with these bacteria, and our diet over those millions of years has helped to feed this symbiotic relationship. When we have significant changes abruptly in our diet, we haven't had the opportunity for these bacteria to catch up and co-evolve with us. And it turns out that they're also helping us to absorb the nutrients that we're taking in our food. And so having a diet that's much closer to the ancestral diet that we are more familiar with evolutionarily is going to help to feed that bacteria and generate more health for us. So with that, I'm going to end where we started with Hippocrates. And that is to say, a wise man should consider that health is the greatest of human blessings and learn how by his own thought to derive benefit from his illnesses. And this sort of brings me back to what Rebecca was saying earlier about the amazing breakfast that your father ate every day, and he lived to be over 100. Food is only one part of the equation. It's very important for us to have food, and it's also really important for us to have friends and social engagement. Social engagement is actually one of the most telling ways that we can actually ensure health. We are social beings. And so when you are eating your vegetables, make sure you're doing it with your friends. Thank you very much.